Welcome along to another episode of the Make Life Work podcast with me, Si Jobling. This podcast is all about speaking to other people from around tech about how they try to find a balance between work, life and any side projects they find time for. From sharing their stories, we hope it helps others find their own balance and maybe enjoy some of the cool things we talk about along the way. This week, I've invited along Brian Suda, a master informatician from Iceland. I've known Brian for many years, been working together on a number of side projects, going way back to when web standards were the main focus, and we have quite a few innovative projects for them. Brian has always fascinated me with his creativity, his can-do attitude, and real blend of freelancing with side projects. After all these years, it's probably the perfect time to understand a bit more about how he works. Let's get into it. How you doing, Brian?
Doing pretty well, given the circumstances. It's the best we got going on right now.
Really? So how has lockdown actually affected you? Has it been a bit of a weird year for you, or?
Definitely been weird. There's been lots of ups and downs, and a lot of new opportunities have come up out of it, but a lot of things have just been much more slow and sluggish. Right when Iceland sort of implemented a lot of its lockdown stuff, it was kind of mid to early March. And we had a conference right at the end of March, which we ended up having to cancel. So that was a huge disappointment, but it's completely understandable. And then sort of teetering along this unknowing of what's going to happen. And then now that things have kind of leveled off, we've kind of gotten into a rhythm, and some new opportunities have popped up here and there just because, I'm remote and I've always been remote. But now companies, all their employees, all their contractors, all their freelancers are remote. So it's given a few opportunities that I might not have had previously because I'm on a much more even playing field with everybody else.
Yeah. Well, we could talk about a few things we'll unpick later on here, but I've known you for probably about 15 years nearly. It's scary how fast that time's gone. And
15 plus.
Oh, it's crazy. So let's go back a little bit and think about, I just want to talk a bit about what your job title is and how you got there. Because I've never heard this job title before. It's Master Informatician, is it?
Yeah. I studied up in Edinburgh, and the degree was actually informatics. It's more of a European term than sort of a North American term. It's kind of quite difficult to kind of explain what informatics is, but it's sort of not just computer science, but it's sort of cross-disciplinary computer science, some theoretical, some practical. And at the time, the degree was informatics. So therefore, what is the sort of noun version of that? And we were thinking, like, if you study mathematics, you're a mathematician. So if you study informatics, you must be an informatician. So I've been trying to use that term and get it in print as many places. So one day, hopefully, we can get it into the Oxford English Dictionary.
Is it not even in the dictionary yet?
No, I think it's just a made-up word. But that's the great thing about English. If you just make up and use words enough and it gets enough traction, it can be cemented into the dictionary. So that's my goal.
Yeah, you mentioned word linguistics in your recent newsletter. Again, we'll talk about it a bit more later. But do you find that language is evolving quite rapidly, especially in the tech era?
I think we probably think it's evolving quite rapidly, but probably every era thinks it's probably evolving quite rapidly. There's always, I think the bigger thing is we've got a bigger mix now. Like previously, most people didn't leave their little communities, or a few people left the communities. But now with the internet, we've got random words being picked up across different languages, different cultures, different sort of silos. And now we've got all sorts of, maybe not jargon, but sort of LOL, so shortenings and all these sort of contractions. And then we get all the super interesting things of just physical limitations. There was a super interesting thing on Twitter, and I don't know how true it is, but in Japan, they had a little evolution of their LOL turned into something. I think it was the Japanese character for grass. Right. And it was like several steps to get there. And it was just a single kanji character. And that was sort of because of a limitation of, keyboards and character count and all sorts of other things. So that sort of stuff is just fascinating to me.
Well, I mean, it kind of ties back to your origins, right, in informatics and stuff like that. It's like the visualization and the it's not just data, it's information that comes out of data, right? Yeah. So how did you go on?
I was going to say, a lot of that is you have to know, it's not, the final thing or the final bit of information. It's like, wow, that's interesting. But there's a lot of historical context and metadata that tends to get lost. It's just like, whenever you do a project, it's like, here's the final thing. Oh, great. That took you 100 hours. Well, yeah, because there's a whole bunch of stuff that you don't see. And that's, to me, that's a super interesting bit for everything, for language, for data, for projects, for life.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I mean, you've got the insights and the history to it, so it helps. How did you sort of evolve your role then? So you got informatics under the belt, and then now you're working a lot of tech, right? So what was that journey like for you?
When I finished school, I was slowly heading back to the States, and I stopped off in Iceland, and I've kind of been here for 15, 16 years now.
It's quite the pit stop.
Yeah, it's just, I'm lazy. Just sign another lease, stick around for another year.
That'll do. Yeah.
It's nice. And, I always tell people some days are good or some days are bad, but it's never boring. We've had financial collapses and volcanoes. So when I first came here, I was working for sort of enterprise software and got to do a lot of interesting projects. And then sort of after that, I've always been either doing small startups or helping small startups or freelancing or having small sort of side projects and companies of my own. And a lot of where I am today just came through, work, through needs, through having to wear multiple hats and then finding things interesting or not finding them interesting, but you just have to turn in your tax returns. So then you become an expert on what can be classed in different tax brackets. And it's just the life of a freelancer.
Sure. So you pretty much freelance for most of your career by the sound of it.
Yeah, probably the biggest chunk of my adult life has been for either freelancing or small startup projects.
Got it. So, I mean, we going back sort of late noughties, we did a bit of work around sort of calendars and stuff like that. But before that, you were a big part of the Microformats sort of community. What can you tell us a bit about what happened there and how you got involved?
Sure. I don't know exactly how it all started, but as part of my part of the degree, we were working on some XSLT. One of my advisors was one of the big guys who kind of worked on XSLT. He was big in XML XSLT at the time. And this was around the 2000s. And I was working on converting, with XSLT, you convert XML into other formats, be it HTML, other XML. It's sort of the transformation language. And one of the things I was transforming is why not transform XML into calendars or contacts. That was vCard and iCal at the time. And Tontech was working on something similar in HTML and trying to codify a way to represent HTML, because HTML has only 45-ish elements that you can choose from.
Yeah, back then.
Yeah. And then you sort of decorated them with class attributes. That way you could say, this is a paragraph, but this paragraph is a class, person, name, whatever the context might be. So that was kind of how you were backporting the XML free tag, name your tag, whatever you want, to HTML. And we kind of found each other somehow. And then we were talking in IRC, and then a few more people came in and we talked about it at a few conferences. And this was sort of riding the wave of the semantic web. That was a big topic, RDF, semantic web. We're going to have a web of data. And all that sounds super interesting and super fun. Sadly, it still hasn't quite come to fruition. The microformats are still out there. They're being used. Certainly, I think the enthusiasm and the hope where it was going to go hasn't quite panned out. But I don't know if that's a problem with silos such as Facebook or adoption or tooling, or maybe a combination of a lot of things. And maybe it was just too early. Maybe its heyday is yet to come.
Maybe. But it was a fascinating era. Although, this is when I sort of got into tech and web a lot more as well. That web standards movement with WASP, I remember that little icon. And it was, I think, what caught my attention when you were doing all this cool stuff with, identifying events. How can you have a standard for events and putting it into a calendar, which is what people actually use. And that is, I made that link. I was like, oh, actually, we've got a World Cup coming up soon. I'm just going to hash out a little side project and see how it comes out. we were talking directly, weren't we? It's like, well, hang on, this doesn't quite work. This isn't parsed correctly, or what element should we be using for this? But it took off, and we actually saw the opportunity, and amazing. I was like, the press we got from this was crazy. It was like the BBC, the Guardian, Yahoo, all these guys were picking it up. The geeks were loving it, but actually the real world were picking it up. And for me, I just feel like you say, it didn't really get that full traction it should have deserved, but I felt good that we'd contribute something to society personally. I was like, yeah, real world, mate. This is how tech can impact the real things out there.
For those people who might not remember or know, what we had done is we created a webpage on our own for it was a World Cup 2006. Yeah. And we had listed out all the matches, the group stages, the brackets, and it was all in HTML. But inside the HTML, we had labeled specifically, this was the name of the venue and the time. So anyone we had our own special scraper, but conceivably the idea was that the browser would see the data and be like, hey, there's 15 events. Do you want to add this to your calendar? And we had come up with a bunch of interesting and fun stuff. Let me grab something. This is a blast from the past. Hang on.
That sounds interesting.
Still keep this one around. This is the massive white elephant that we ended up from this project as well. Because we did this just on our own, didn't we? The World Cup calendar.
Yep.
And then afterwards, we were approached by UEFA.
Yep.
And they said, we love this thing. We want to do, was it for Euro Cup? Or whatever it was called, UEFA.
I think it was originally, we followed up with UEFA, the Euro 2008, did another version of it then. And then UEFA approached and said, we'd like to try this on the Champions League and the Europa Leagues and all the other competitions they run. So that's when we got into a bit more detail. It was, again, fascinating because that back office data, we went, oh my God, there's so much information to play with here.
But do you remember, we did that first project just out of passion. And then the guy we were in contact with at UEFA was like, oh, really sorry, we can't pay you, but what's your favorite football team? And then like a month later, we got football kit in the post. And I've still got mine.
Oh, wow.
Because
fantastic.
I remember I got a letter from the post office and they said, come on down, you got a package. It's like, okay, what? It's like, yeah, you owe 50 quid. For what? I don't even know who this is from. And I had to open it up. So I ended up paying for the free work that we did for UEFA.
No.
So I'm never going to throw the football jersey away.
It was such a, like you say, it was nice intent, but the fact you got to pay that import tax just to receive a gift was like, what the hell? But it was a wonderful era. Going back to that project and all those spin-offs we did, we tried even to do like a live Twitter commentary from that data as well. Yeah. And that concept caught on.
And the other thing, do you remember, for the younger listeners out there, you paid extra to Vodafone and all these companies to get an SMS when there was a goal.
Yeah.
And there was like a premium service that the telecoms provided. And we were like, we have this data from their XML feed. We could tweet this out. And then if you had the DMs on, you would get a direct message of a goal, of a red card, of whatever from the games and just totally usurp. And we built it. We never released it, but we built it.
It was a wonderful POC, but I think at that point, UEFA realised we've got tech teams that can build this stuff. We're going to do it ourselves now, but thanks for proving it right. And now, even still now, I was talking to another person the other week, Franca Hood, and she's always been doing the live Derby county commentary, but manually. So it was not like the automated system that we built. But again, that is such a diluted market now. People love the live match day commentary. And I remember that first night we did the UEFA and we turned it on. I think we were both watching and going, is it going to break? Is it going to break? No. But oh my, the data that was coming out, it was good times. And I think we were both younger and more energetic back then. This was a late night project that we worked on. But yes, is there any other things that you kind of missed from those days as well?
Some of it is definitely the community. There was always people hanging around in IRC and chatting, and we had a wiki, and there was a mailing list. And I think with the rise of social media, Twitter, Facebook, sort of that community both is disappeared to other places, but also I think a lot of the people that were there, they're like us. They're now 15 years older. They've got families, they've got jobs. And I think that's sort of our little cohort. You think like, where did they go? I haven't heard from this person in so long. It's not like that these days. But I'm sure people 15 years younger than us are having the same experience. Just we're not in that clique anymore.
Maybe we set the foundations, and then the young kids come in and go, "Hey, we could do this in React in seconds rather than months." We're like, oh God, here we go.
Yeah.
how times change. I mean, going back to those times as well, you were also a writer. You wrote a book about designing with data. Can you tell us a bit about what got you into that space and, where that went?
Yeah, that book was published in 2010, so it's 10 years old. So I was probably working on it for a few years before that. But the folks at 5 Simple Steps was the publisher, and that was Mark Bolton and Mark Bolton Design. Yep. He had written a book, and I think I was the third one. Donna Fowler, I think, was the second one. I've got the book somewhere. But yeah, I was working at a small startup, and we were doing a lot of natural language text processing. We were helping video game companies trying to understand their communities and help community managers just tackle the sheer volume of information. And part of my job was helping build the front end UI, and that's when we got quite deep into sort of visualizing data. And it was an interesting time as well because it wasn't quantitative data. Quantitative data is the hard numbers, 15 people, 37 people, and we have good ways of figuring out how to visualize numbers and compare numbers. But we were looking at a lot of qualitative data, people who were writing comments. And I was like, well, do you do some sentiment analysis, or how do you know which words are trending or what words are popular? So we had to do a lot of sort of inventing and a lot of ad hoc, trying things and seeing what worked. And a lot of that practice and stuff got distilled down into the book. The publisher went out of business. They were sold, or Mark Bolton Design got bought by Monotype, and then they turned off the publishing arm. So I own the copyrights to the book again. And that's always, in my infinite free time, I would love to do a second edition of that and spice it up with some findings and just kind of update it a bit.
So that was 10 years ago, right? So is a lot of that still relevant, do you think, as well?
Yeah, I think at the time, I got a bit of grief for it, but I'm glad I did it this way. Because, the title of the book is a practical guide to designing with data. And I think a lot of people were like, how do I do this in Excel? How do I do this in Tableau or whatever the tool was? And even in all my other writing, I try and avoid too much on the actual tool set, partly because that it'll be outdated in 6 months or something, or like where the menu item to find and create this is going to be gone. So I tried to make it a little more abstract and just talk about charts and graphs and sort of the more bigger picture. So I think a lot of it is still relevant. There's probably more stuff I would love to add into it and update and just make, clarify things a bit more. So there is definitely room for an update, but I think it's still totally valuable and still fresh.
I remember reading through it back in 2010, it must have been, when, like you say, and there was a lot of really cool ideas in there. And I think we're both kind of getting into that space of like, how do I make this useful? There's so much out there, but I want to make it useful. But I do miss that 5 Simple Steps series as well. I know they've moved on and all this sorts of stuff, but the fact that you guys, as a community, again, were really really passionate about these things. Mark invested into all of you that were like really good at these areas, and sort of like, write a book and we'll publish it when it's ready. I don't think he was tight on time frames. He was just like, when it's ready, we'll ship it. He might give you a goal or something, but again, I don't know if it's the industry's just got so big. I feel like we're missing that small nature that we used to have back then.
Agreed.
But it's good. And it'd be nice if you did revisit maybe and do a 2020 edition and bring things up again. So,
well, there's 2 months left. 2 months.
True.
That's the thing. Like, it's not so much a matter of, like, I think I just need to carve out the time. And one idea I had is just, put it on Kickstarter. Say like, okay, look, the book is finished. It's a low risk project. I want to update the chapters, do a refresh, add some more information in there. Because I think also the way I like to both work and to write and convey information, it's not like, this is the right way, this is the wrong way, this is useful, this isn't useful. It's more like, here's a bunch of tools to have in your toolbox, and I'll tell you when they're good and when they're bad. And then it's up to you to try and figure out, in this situation, this is the best tool for the job. So agreed, in the book, there are some obscure things that might not be useful unless you do financial charts in a newspaper and trying to visualize 500 things at the same time. Then knowing that tool existed and having it in your toolbox could prove to be useful. So, if I put it up on Kickstarter and said, here's what I want to do, if I can get 1,000 people or whatever to pre-order, it makes it worth my time. It makes it worth the publishing and printing and post office time as well.
Yep. I'll try and hold you to that. I know we're not going to get it done this year now, but it'd be good to see that back on Kickstarter and try and get revisit to those things. That would be amazing. I mean, you mentioned a few times there, trying to find the time. This podcast is all about finding the balance and the time to do all these things. Can you talk through your typical working day or working week and how, what that might look like in an average way? Because I know it must be quite different in different days.
Yeah. I mean, this is not struggling, but at the moment I'm trying to figure out, sort of recalculate hourly rate. Right. And in my hourly rate, I'm always trying to figure out, because I mean, there's a big, there's the salary that you want to make, and then there's like the taxes you got to pay, and then the hardware costs you have to, renew and refresh stuff every once in a while. But then there's the things you tend to forget about, like, oh, there's probably 10 vacation days a year that I need to pay myself for, but I'm not going to be, putting any hours in the time tracker. Then there's like, well, there's a couple sick days a month. There's this, there's that. So once you start, and then you're never working, you're never billable for 8 hours a day. So once you kind of subtract all that, I'm happy if I can get 6 hours in, sort of billable work time. And there's always, especially with freelancing, there's a lot of chasing up on projects and meetings on potential projects. So at the moment, I've probably got 3 or 4 major customers. Right. And I'm splitting my sort of week between them. So one of them is an old survey company that myself and some friends started maybe 10 years ago. Officially, I'm on the books 40%. So one day a week, I'm definitely, coding and working and managing things. And then the other day, I'm kind of on call. So if something breaks or, hey, it's the end of the month and the end of the month happens to be a Wednesday, I've got to do some stuff. Yeah. So, which is great because it's not like freelance rates, but it's steady, guaranteed income for 40%. And then I've got a West Coast US client, which is one of the more top secret projects, which hasn't rolled out yet. That's always tricky because sometimes that means meetings at 8 p.m., 9 p.m., 10 p.m., whenever the rest of the team is available. And that's sort of 2 to 3 days a week. And then here and there, I'm helping some friends and colleagues from old startup companies. They've got new startup companies and they're growing and they need help with the data team. So I go in, and it's great to do some pair programming. So it's like, okay, I can sit back and I'm going to train you. And it's also great because then, when that afternoon or that day is done, you can put it in a box and forget about it till next week because it's not my project or my responsibility. I'm just there to, spot check code, to think about new things, to be like, well, what about if we do it this way? So that's sort of the level of like billable time workload that I'm doing each week. On top of that, I'm trying to do weekly weeknotes. So just sort of every Friday, wrap up and write a little bit about the week. Mm-hmm. At first, it was kind of like, okay, who's actually reading this? And I have no idea if people are. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. But then after I've done this for a few years, you kind of like, when was, and then all of a sudden you can search your own website and be like, oh, that's when I did that. Oh God, that was 2010. You can, it becomes a resource more for myself, actually. And then also I've been trying to think about other freelancers and, just putting in there like, look, I've got 2 outstanding invoices. They haven't paid in a month. Just if other people come across this and they're like, oh, I thought that was only me, just to kind of let people know that that's just the way things go sometimes. And it's just normal. And they haven't paid, but they pay every time. They're just slow or whatever. So maybe give some reassurance to other people. So I try and get that out once a week. I'm getting back into just generally writing. I was counting today. I've got about 20 articles just stubbed for ideas. I'm really trying to just get a publishing schedule together and write 1 article a week. So far, I've failed at that, but we're getting close. And then on top of that, there's you had mentioned like the quarterly newsletter. So I try and send out a newsletter once a quarter. So on top of, there's the base workload, billable time, there's this layer of things writing that I want to do. And then when I can squeeze in time each week, sort of interesting, fun projects that I feel that I need to do more of, because as a freelancer, you never know where your next meal is going to come from. I always kind of talk about this like hunter-gatherers versus farmer agriculturalists. If you've got a day job and you clock in, 9 to 5, 5 days a week, you're that farmer. You've got your field, it might not be great, but you're never going to have super highs and lows. Where doing freelance, you're chasing that mammoth, and you might be starving for 2 weeks and then get a massive big project which pays really well, but that's got to tide you over for 2 months because you might not find the next project. So that top layer of sort of personal projects is to sort of show off what I can do. Because if you're not promoting yourself, when you finish one of these projects, you're like, okay, where's the next one? Then you've got to start that machine to figure out to promote yourself. Then it's too late. There was a book, I'm looking on the shelf, I don't see it. It's a crappy airport business book, and it's called Dig Your Well Before You're Thirsty. And I don't recommend the book. I mean, it's fine, it's a book. But there was only two nuggets of wisdom in these, 200 pages. And one of them is the title, just Dig Your Well Before You're Thirsty. And it's especially for a freelancer. It's like the minute you finish a project and then start looking, then you start digging the well, that's too late. You've got to be digging that well because you're going to need water, the minute that project ends. So you can't, dig your well before you're thirsty. So that's the key takeaway. Yeah. Then the other one, the guy, he was just saying, he had some throwaway comment, which I thought was brilliant. He's like, if you are the kind of company who sends out, Christmas cards to your clients, you're going to be in a stack of 100 other Christmas cards. Send out an Easter card, or an Easter or a Thanksgiving card or a Halloween card. You're going to be the only one, and then they're going to remember you. So those are the only two bits of wisdom in the entire book. But I think they're both really good, and something I try and do myself.
It's good. I mean, there's loads in there. We'll have to unpack at some point. For me, as a simple takeaway, you've got all this sort of freelance work you need to fit in. They're the priorities. Then you do the sort of the things you want to do that you can see the value in, but it's just being realistic about what you can fit in. The coaching you mentioned as well. So when you're doing your pairing, when you're working with other people in the community, again, that's a nice playback. And I don't know about you, but I get a real kick from seeing someone else achieve from a little conversation we've had. Not in a selfish way, but it's just like actually made a difference. Yes. It's just one of them moments.
Yeah. I mean, like being a programmer, some things are just blatantly obvious. You make the for loop, you use the variable, you're done, whatever. And then someone who can, they can do some SQL, they can code a little bit, and you sit them down, you're like, here's how you do it. And you just watch their mind explode. That's super exciting. They're like, oh, I never thought about it that way. That's also really rewarding.
Yeah, totally. That's the one thing I do miss from being in an office as well. I mean, obviously you've been isolated in Iceland for many years, but when I was back in London, I was working in the office with all the engineers to see them pairing and going, never thought of it that way. You're like, oh, that's why you pair. This is why it's worthwhile. It can be quite costly from a delivery perspective because you're getting two people looking at the same problem rather than doing two things. But the value of going, you're doing it together to get better quality long term. This is going to be more valuable. But yeah, I'm glad you're aware of all these sort of different hats that you have to wear for your job and your well-being. Really, I mean, you must enjoy the different variety of stuff you do as well.
Yeah, it keeps things fresh. I mean, I think after doing this for so long, I'm probably would never be a good 9-to-5 corporate employee, just because I would probably tire of some of the projects or just the same view every time. Where doing freelance suits me because I can have a little taste over here and a little taste over here, and then I can do a little bit more of that. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. And charging an hourly rate allows you to have some sort of flexibility and like, okay, we had a really good month. I'm going to take an extra day or two here and there and explore those personal projects or projects that could eventually spin out into their own product in the future.
Do you find that you naturally get to pick the projects that you want to work on, or do you have to find that it's a bit of a give and take sometimes? This one's going to pay me for a few months, but after that, I'm going to kind of find something that really does mean more to me.
A little bit of both.
Okay.
Sometimes I just fall backwards into projects. People recommend me, and then it's like, wow, the timing just worked out, and things go well. Sometimes you contact someone and they're like, oh, we were looking for a full-time employee. Like, oh, I can give you maybe 1 day a week tops. So, it might be a dream project, but it's just not realistic. It doesn't fit in the schedule.
But at least you're aware of that. You mentioned earlier your quarterly newsletter, optional.is. There's two questions to this. One, why quarterly? And two, what do you see as the purpose of it? I mean, you mentioned weeknotes, which again is part reflection, but I'm subscribed. I have been for God knows how many years now. I just curious, what motivated you to go for that frequency and what the sort of general goal is with it as well.
Yeah, I think the frequency kind of started because that's sort of what I felt I definitely could commit to. I can't hit week notes, so there's definitely no way I could have done a weekly email. I think an annual email, some people who do that, you're just like, oh, I totally forgot about you. So I kind of thought quarterly would be not too pushy. Like, if I don't have anything to say, I've got 3 months to find something. And it was, just a reminder that I still exist, where like annually, I think people might forget. Yeah. So, and also I think McSweeney's had a newsletter. They had a quarterly newsletter that they sent out like 5 times a year or something, which I thought was quite quirky and funny. But yeah, so I thought quarterly was sort of both a pace that my audience would enjoy, as well as something that I think I could commit to and stick to, being able to send something out every quarter.
You mentioned your audience. What is your typical audience?
That's the tricky thing. I've had this newsletter for several years now. Before having a newsletter was cool, and I think some of it came about. I don't remember who exactly was talking about it, but it's this concept of like owning your own audience. And maybe it was the Kevin Kelly's, 100 True Fans. There's another lady, Amy, I can't remember her last name. She's got like 20 by 100 University. And both of them kind of come to the same conclusion. Like, if you can find 100 people willing to pay you $20 a month, you can make $100,000 a year. So you didn't need to be like the next Facebook style, product. You just needed a niche product, like a base camp or something simpler. And it would, as long as you could get 100 people who were willing to pay you $20 a month, you could live off that. So some of the newsletter idea was like, okay, let's start to build an audience that I own, that I can contact, that I can make an ask. Like maybe in the future, this sort of Patreon / Kickstarter idea, if I didn't have this newsletter, I just said, hey, I've got this thing, do you want to sign up? It would be crickets out there. But at least I've got a few hundred people on this mailing list, and I get 30 to 40% open rate. It's probably going down, but some of that might just be trackers and people being more aware of the evils of the social media tracking. But Emma, I think I've got and also, yeah, when you have 10 people, it's friends and family and every single person opens it. And then as the news list grows, people are less committed to you as you creating content. They're less interested in you because they're just, they heard of you, or this one thing you said was interesting. So yeah, I don't exactly know who my audience is, but they stick around. And if they like the sort of weird random things that I write and sort of the connections that I put together, then those are the kind of people on the list. And if they enjoy it, they stay. And if they don't, they don't. And at first it felt really bad when people unsubscribed, but you're just like, well, maybe this isn't for them. I'm not going to take it personally. Yeah,
it's a weird one, that bit about unsubscribing, because I think I've got into a trap of this in like social media in the past. My Twitter followers dropped significantly, or whatever it was. Did I say something, or whatever it was? And then I go, if they don't want to follow me, then that's probably a good thing actually, because I'm being warts and all honest. This is me. Don't follow me for something that you don't expect me to be.
Yeah.
So, but you mentioned again your newsletter. It's a real good mix of random thoughts, but actually, when you link them together, it becomes quite a fascinating topic. Where do you find the source for your content?
A lot of different places. I follow a lot of random people on Twitter, so I collect it there. I've probably got several hundred things in my RSS reader, so things pop up there. And then some of them, someone will make an off comment, and I'll be like, is that really right? And then I'll go look it up. Like, I remember, it's probably been a year or two now, but Kanye wanted to change his name to Ye. And he said like, oh, it's because it's the most popular word in the Bible. And I was like, hang on a sec. I've done enough natural language parsing that Ye doesn't sound like a stop word. So I think the or will be more popular. So I went to Gutenberg Press and got a copy of the Bible and just split on spaces and did word count. And Ye was like, 50th or 60th most popular word in the Bible. But, I made a little newsletter thing about that. And I guess that's another thing that makes the newsletter a little more difficult but unique, is I'm not trying to just regurgitate content that I might have put in the week notes, or I'm trying to make unique original stuff And some of it might link back to the website, or I might mention previous articles, but I try to make the newsletter, the content there only there. And then again, some people kind of called me out like, well, if it's good content, you should keep it everywhere. So now, at least on the website, there is an archive section for the newsletter. So you can read all the past editions, and it's Google juice as well. I mean, the search engines will crawl it, and people might, find me through those vectors as well.
Yeah, you made that point a few times now. The fact you are writing week notes, blog posts, newsletters, generally for your own purpose. If anyone is interested, fantastic. But actually, it's for me. And that's the same reason I do my week notes now. I'm on week 42 this year. There have been some quiet weeks. In fact, last week was quite a quiet one, but I felt like there's still a few things worth noting. But I like the fact that you are just generally doing it for your own benefit. And if others people appreciate it, winning.
Yeah, and like you were saying earlier, if people unsubscribe, originally I took that sort of personally, like, oh, you don't like my stuff. What did I do? Or did I write something different? Too long, too short? I think the other thing I come back to is like, if in the future I wanted to find my 100 true fans, I would rather have you gone rather than look at my list and be like, I've got 1,000 people. If everybody paid me $10, I could make up. I'm like, no, only a small portion are going to do that. So if I weeded out everybody and my list is small anyway, I'll probably have a pretty high return, because when we did our Kickstarter for the notebooks years ago, I tapped into the mailing list. And again, like those people already love, I would hope that they already love the stuff I'm doing. They know that it's going to be funny and quirky and generally interesting. And I might have a much higher conversion rates from ask to buy or ask to pay than I would if I just tried to get as many people on my list as possible.
Yeah, those new notebooks, I forgot about them until your newsletter this recently. You made a point of them towards the bottom. I was like, oh yeah, I've got some of them hanging around somewhere. I need to dig them out. I think they're in a loft or something. But good times. We're rushing through time here, but you mentioned newsletters a few times, and you built a iOS app, an Apple app to kind of parse newsletters into something different. Can you tell us a little bit about what motivated that and that kind of journey you had on it?
Yeah, I'm a huge supporter of the web. I love the web, and if I can do it on the web first, I always try and do it there. But I'm also super interested in the places the web isn't, and that's all the little nooks and crannies in iOS, notifications, the share sheet, some of the interactions, now shortcuts where the web isn't. And I read a lot of newsletters, and I wrote a really simple app. It's basically an artisanal IMAP client. It only looks at a single folder in your IMAP mailbox, and then looks at all the email to or who it's from and tries to thread it like an RSS reader. So it basically converts an email folder into an RSS reader. And I mostly just did it to scratch my own itch, just to learn a little bit more about iOS, but also I use it all the time and I'm loving it.
I've never asked you this, but have you had many buyers into the iOS app you've built, or is it just literally for your own benefit?
I don't think I've had many buyers. The handful of free apps that I have had, some downloads, but less than 100. Maybe it barely pays for the iOS developer account.
Well, that's break it even. You're not out of pocket on that, to be honest.
But I'm not really promoting it.
Well, true. And this is the other thing. I don't think you don't generally shout about the things you do as much as some other people do on the web. You're quite not an introvert, but more reserved, let's say. You're not an extrovert mode going out, look at everything I've made. All these things you do are just for your own benefit. I think that's what always attracted me to you as an acquaintance, really, is that humbleness of what you're doing. So without getting too bromance with you, but I just thought, that's the thing for me. It's just like, if I enjoy it, great. If I don't, I'm not doing it. And that seems to be your attitude as well. We've talked a lot about side projects, work and stuff like that. What else do you do just to wind down and, look after yourself in a different way?
That's a good question. That's probably struggling with the most recently, partly just because of COVID. It's more difficult to get out and meet friends or get out and just have the time to go for a walk. Now we're starting to get into the winter time. We're quickly heading into 24 hours of darkness in a few months.
Yep.
So it just makes it much more difficult and not so nice to get out and enjoy things. But I used to just read loads of books and just sort of kick back and relax. And now I just shunt off everything into Instapaper or some Pinboard or something. So I know this is interesting and I want to read it. I just don't have time now. So I think at the moment that is probably suffering the most. And some of that is just client workload and yeah, COVID situation and just life. But meeting up with friends, getting out of the house. That's probably the bigger relaxing things to do.
Yeah, I was going to say, being in Iceland, you've got all that beautiful natural sort of views that you can enjoy. Do you get to do that much, or is it really difficult with your work-life balance?
No, I mean, previously we had a lot of friends and visitors coming through and staying in the guest room and stuff. And being freelance, it makes it much more easy to sort of shuffle things around. Like, okay, well, this is not high priority. I can do this, after dinner. So then you can take the morning and show friends around or go to, events or take the car out to the countryside. So I think freelancing allows for a lot more flexibility than having a sort of 9-to-5 job where you got to officially clock out or tell your boss, so Wednesday I'm not going to be in. Like, freelance, you're just beholden to yourself and maybe some deadlines. If you can hit those deadlines, okay, you can shuffle things around. Work at 2 a.m. if you want. So when I think friends were coming through more often, it was much more easy to get out and see the countryside. And it was also a good excuse because whenever you live somewhere, you never do the touristy things yourself.
No, you're right. I mean, like I say, I've been 9-to-5 clock puncher for most of my life, so I've always been locked down to that mode, unfortunately. But even when I was working in London, I'm literally around the corner from Westminster in my more recent role. And I have not even seen that place. I can look out my window and see Big Ben and the big eye. Never been anywhere near that stuff in my life. And, just past 40, it's scary that these things don't happen. But going back to yourself, so obviously you have guests and they encourage you to get out, but do you feel like, actually, I don't need to, I don't want to, or you just feel like, you know what, it's just part of what I am now. I enjoy it when it's there. Yeah,
I think more the latter. I think it's just kind of, you've carved your little niche, you stay at home, you do your stuff. It's there if you need to, but there's just a big enough backlog of interesting things, just, an arm's reach away, a pile of books on the table.
Yeah. And I mentioned like health and well-being. Do you do much for fitness or any exercise or anything like that, diet-wise?
No, I've got the ring, trying to close the rings, but other than that, not as much as I should, for sure. That's right. Definitely on the to-do list when I can get back into a more regular schedule. Because like I said, everything's shut, the pools, the gyms, everything for COVID.
It's made it a lot harder, that's for sure. I mean, I'm literally just doing a workout in the living room 3 times a week now. And that's, luckily I can close the curtains for that. No one should see that, but at least I can personally feel better for doing something, It's great. So, I mean, what I ask every guest now is, what kind of tricks of the trade do you have that help you organize your sort of masses of things that you do? You've got your freelance work, you've got your side project stuff, you've got your little fun projects as well. How do you organize your thoughts at the moment?
I kind of live out of 2 apps on the phone, the reminders and the notes. And I think it was part of the GTD, whereas if you can do it in 2 minutes, just do it. And if you can't, just put it somewhere. There's a universal capture. So if you write it down, then you don't have to think about it, and then your short-term memory isn't stressed out about it. So just get it out of your head. So I think those 2 is just open up reminders, put something in there, add a date, remind me next Monday, whatever. And then, the notes app where I just I've got, it also helps me with the week notes. Like I have an individual page for each week, and then I do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and I have the little check boxes in there. And if, like last week when we scheduled this, I just opened up the one for this week, put on Monday, talk with Cy, 11 o'clock, put it in there. So then I don't forget. And then on Friday, when I want to, decompress and look at the week notes, I can just look what I did. Oh, okay. And then just kind of write a narrative form on that to-do list or checklist. So that is the best way I've found at the moment, is to keep everything sane. Is just don't try and remember it. Just throw it in one of those 2 apps and be my second brain.
Fair play. I mean, I'm very similar mode to you, actually. I fire up bare notes every Monday just to create my outline for the week. It's like, what's got to be done this week? What's got to be done today, tomorrow? Give it some times and stuff like that. I use TickTick for my task management. So it's slightly different, but very similar concept of just, right, before I forget it, shove it in TickTick, and it'll be there for when I look at it next. But you're a bit of a geek like me, right? Have you found a way of trying to automate this, using Siri or anything else, any of the background processes that makes it a bit simpler for you?
Yeah, I've looked into a few different ways of doing it. The reminders and the calendar are connected in at least in iOS. They're part of this general database. So right. I've tried to write a few apps that sit on top of that, which can then pull those out. And it was called like today and tomorrow. So like, what am I doing today? What am I doing tomorrow? And then I think everything else. I never finished it because then I kind of moved over to a Siri shortcut. Because you can do a lot of the same stuff. Just ask True. Siri, and it'll look through the reminders in the calendar, and you can have it speak it to you or do sort of push notifications. So I've been looking at that, but I'm one of those people that just like, if you got 30 seconds and nothing's happening, you pick up your phone. So I just look at the apps and put them in there.
And the iOS 14 stuff now, we've got a lot of these shortcuts and dashboard and widgets to make that easier anyway, haven't we? So. Yeah. If it works, good.
But that's it. The least reminders is synced to the watch. Notes isn't. I really like the notes because, like with reminders, the minute you tick it off, it's gone. At least with notes, it's there. So on Friday, I can sort of review things. So I'm trying to find sort of this balance between short-term, remind me on this day, versus long-term, I need an archive of everything I did this week. So if there was something out there that was sort of a blend between those, that'd be great.
That'd be amazing. Well, maybe we'll have a look at this next year when we've got a bit more capacity. Let's go back quickly. So you were showing me something right now. There's another little project you're working on. Can you tell us a little bit about that before we wrap it up?
Yeah. It was a Oculus VR headset for all the people listening at home. Started to dabble a little bit in VR. I've always been super interested in VR and AR, so virtual reality and augmented reality. And I've luckily been working on a couple of VR projects, and it's been super interesting just to, you read stuff, you think about things, but actually once you have it in your hands and you play with it and you watch other people use it, you really get a sense of like, this is going to go somewhere or no, it's not. And I think personally, I'm much more bearish and enjoy augmented reality than virtual reality. Virtual reality is really weird. Like, there's a couple like virtual reality 360 movies, and you're like, oh, you really got to check this out. And you put it on somebody's head, and then you just stand there for 6 minutes while they watch a movie. It's like, well, there's no community. There's no like sitting on a couch watching the same thing. So as grand and as cool as it might be, it's not there. It's not a social thing. So it's been great to actually have one and let people try it and see how they react, and then how you feel while you watch them react. And you're like, I want to be part of this, but I can't. So
you're not bought into the VR yet, but you think AR has got a lot more potential at the moment.
Yeah, and someone had told me, there was a good quote, I don't know exactly where it came from, but they said, what the desktop computer did for sort of white collar work, if you were an accountant or a lawyer, when you got a computer on your desktop, your productivity, multiplied by factors of 1,000. They're thinking that VR and AR will do the same sort of thing for like blue collar work. If you're a carpenter right now, you measure everything, you have to look, you go over there, you spot it. Conceivably, you'll have AR apps, which will, massively increase your productivity to the same level that sort of Excel did for accountants.
It's fascinating stuff. And I think you're right with AR. I see more potential with AR than I do with VR. I remember watching Ready Player One, and I was like, oh, this is a mind blower. And no wonder Spielberg tapped into it. But it's quite limiting. I think that's the problem. You've got to put the headset on and you've got to stay in a space to do things. Whereas AR, you can take your phone anywhere, you can show it to anything, and it will literally bring another world to you. So if you've got anything you can share with us when you can, that'll be wonderful to see what you've got. And I think we'll probably have to revisit, because you've always got something to show. That's the best thing with talking to you. You blow my mind. You get me thinking about other things that I shouldn't be thinking about. Really great to see you, mate. Thanks for joining me on this episode. How can people get hold of you if they want to have a chat and follow along with the things you're doing?
Sure. Sort of the website optional.is is where I'm sort of doing all my freelance and work from. But suda.co.uk is my personal website. And from there, you can find me on Twitter and other sources.
Cool. We'll get all the links in the show notes as well so people can find you. Lovely.
Great.
Thanks for joining me, mate. And thanks for helping me wrap up another fascinating series of the Make Life Work podcast. So hopefully we'll speak to you again soon.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe in person next.
Oh, that'll be a novelty, wouldn't it? Or in VR. Hey. Maybe not. Cheers, buddy. Thanks for coming along.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks to Brian for joining me on this episode of the Make Life Work podcast. Always a pleasure to have a chat with Brian. And as always, my mind is blown with all the cool things he's been working on. We will definitely get him back again in the future. We'll put all the links in the show notes at makelifeworkpodcast.com, along with all the other show archives in there as well. Make sure you follow us on all the socials at Make Life Work Pod on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook. And if you are enjoying this, maybe leave us a review in Apple, Amazon or Google Podcasts, or any of the other podcast apps that you might be using out there. That wraps up season 4 of the podcast and another fantastic round of guests. I'd like to thank Liz Elcoat, Naomi White, Franca Hood, Dan Vinicum and Brian Suda for sharing their stories in this season. I hope you've all enjoyed the conversations as much as I have. We'll be back soon with another 5 guests from around tech, talking about how they try to find a balance with work, life and any side projects. Stay subscribed so you don't miss the trailer or any of the new episodes as they drop. Speak to you then.